Good afternoon and happy Sabbath. It's a blessing to be here with you today. My name is Salvador Gomez. For those of you that don't know who I am, um, we are continuing our studies on the third angel's message, um, and we will continue to look at the old historic view of Revelation chapter 14 and Revelation chapter 7, uh, concerning the sealing of the 144,000. This is the last slide that we were able to read in the last presentation, just so that we can get a little snapshot of what we left off with. Um, we were able to point out uh, the little time of trouble. This little time of trouble began November 18th, 1848. Okay? That's when the little time of trouble begins. Throughout this time, according to the last quote, and I'll read it again just so that we remember, it's the time of trouble, in parentheses, on the increase, and will increase more and more. The trouble will never end until the earth is rid of the wicked. And so we're living in that time. And we had mentioned the many wars that there have been since that time, beginning with the revolution that sprung up in France. Uh, and that is what kicked off the sealing of the 144,000. That was the event that initiates this very message. And so let us continue. Notice and the majority of the quotes that we'll be reading from is from a very valuable uh, Seventh-day Adventist book called Daniel and the Revelation. The I believe 1898 version or 1897. I could be off by a year. But this book, according to the testimony of Jesus, contains the light for our time, and it's God's helping hand. And so we'll be reading from, on the most part, from this very book. And so notice this quote that we're going to start off with. It says, in a gospel prophecy found in Isaiah chapter 8, we read, bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. This must refer to a work of reviving some of the claims of the law in the minds of the disciples, which had been overlooked or perverted from their true meaning. And this, in the prophecy, is called sealing the law, or restoring to it its seal, which had been taken from it. And so according to the prophecies that we've been going over in the first, second, and third angel's message so far, which prophecy is it that is referred to here where it says that there is a need to restore the principles of this law? Does anybody recall? If not, it's okay. We're going to get right into it and with this next slide. Notice what it says here. And he shall speak great words against the Most High. This is Daniel 7:25. And shall wear out the saints of the Most High and think to change what? Times and laws. Okay, so this is speaking of that little horn, which is the papacy, and the papacy thought to change times and laws. Okay, so which laws is he referring to? It must be referring to God, because it says at the very beginning, and he shall speak great words against who? The Most High. that is God, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. And so the context and the verses or the words before that let us know that the times and laws referred to here are referring to God's law. And this is the law that needs to be what? Restored. It needs to be restored. Okay. And so when we read in Isaiah chapter 8 that bind up the or seal the law among my disciples, this is the restoration that is taking place. This is what God wanted to restore, the law, right? Okay, and so we're going to get into the facets of the law, which part of the law needed to be restored, or which precept. If the reader would understand the agencies to be employed in the soon coming contest. Okay, so there's a contest. Do we know what a contest is? When there's two different parties that are contending, right? Or two contenders, two different individuals, like boxing, or in a sports, there's two different groups, right? So this is what this is referring to, but in a spiritual sense, we have two classes of people at the end of the world. Okay, says that this is that the agencies to be employed in the soon coming contest. He has but to trace the record of the means which who? Rome employed for some object in ages past. So who are we to look at? Which power are we to look at to know how this was how this happened in the past? It says Rome. Okay. Rome. What did Rome do in the past? It says, if he would know how Papists and Protestants united will deal with those, and this is talking in the future, okay? How Papists and Protestants united will deal with those who reject their dogmas. Which dogmas? We'll see. You know what dogmas are, right? Doctrines, teachings, okay? Let him see the spirit which Rome manifested toward the Sabbath and its defenders. Okay, so remember we looked at the 1260, 1,260 years. Remember when the little horn came up and he had to take out three of the horns, right? The barbarian tribes, right? How did he treat them? Was he kind to them? No, right? He annihilated them. He killed them. Okay. And so that is what we are to look to. On top of that, at the beginning of the 1,260 years, we see an inquisition, right? An inquisition of Christians being persecuted by other Christians, right? Because they didn't accept the Roman teachings, the dogmas, and doctrines. Okay. Now, that is the example that we have for how Papists and Protestants in the future will also treat Christians. Okay. Notice what it continues to say. Royal edicts, general councils, and church ordinances sustained by secular power. Okay. So these royal edicts, general councils, and church ordinances are of a religious nature, right? They're religious. They're from the church. But notice who is the church uniting with? By secular power. What is secular power? The government. The government, exactly. That's the secular power. Yes. Isn't that what the papacy is? Yes. The papacy is a it has both. When we look at Revelation chapter 17, we see the woman riding a beast, right?
Yes.
And usually when you see a beast that is being directed by the person riding it, he is the person riding is the one directing, right? It's telling the beast in which direction to go. Let's think about uh, a person on a horse, right? He has the he's steering the horse, he's steering the guiding the horse, telling which way to go. And so likewise, it's the church guiding the government.
The church guide the government.
Yes.
Wrong.
Yes. And so we have churchcraft and statecraft. That's the secular power. But the one that directs or guides, in this case, is the church.
Okay.
Right? The royal edicts, the general councils, and the church ordinances come from who? From the church. And the church is telling the secular power, which is the government, what to do. That's an issue, right? Or no? You don't know? If the church tells the government, this is what we need to do, is that right or wrong?
Wrong.
Why?
Because the church no tiene nada que ver con no tiene que estar con el gobierno.
Exactly. You shouldn't have anything to do with that.
Uh-huh.
When Christ was put on the spot, he was asked a certain question, right? They asked him about paying taxes to Caesar, right? This was a trap. If he would have said, oh, no, don't pay taxes to Caesar, what would have happened to Jesus? They would have thrown him in prison, right? But he asked them for a coin and he said, whose face do you see on this coin? Caesar. And so give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God. You don't know what belongs to God?
Because that coin is material, is money.
Right?
And for God is what?
Okay.
Our soul or what?
That's number one.
There's a lot.
That's number one.
Even your tithes, your money.
Yeah.
Even part of your money, part of your finances. Also, everything that belongs to God.
Oh. Okay.
Time.
I know that our time,
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
Most importantly is our hearts. Right? And if our heart belongs to God, then what else, right?
Yeah.
What else belongs to him? Everything. Everything.
Oh.
See? Everything.
Everything will fall in place.
But in regards to what Christ was trying to say is that there's a separation, right? There's a separation. Caesar is not involved in what God is asking. See? Caesar does what Caesar does, and he's put there because God allowed it. And God is totally separate from the secular power. That's what Christ is teaching us, right? But of course, just like Brother Tony was saying, tithe, okay, time, your thoughts, those things, if we give our heart to God, then it will show. It will show. You will give with your heart. See? All right. And so but the point of what Christ meant is that church and state need to be separate. There should be a wall. Okay. And according to history, when we look at the little horn that we see on the chart, right? When we see the little horn coming up, it's the church that is doing what it says here on this quote. Royal edicts, general councils, and church ordinances sustained by secular power, which is the government, were the steps by which the pagan festival attained its position of honor in the Christian world. The first public measure enforcing which day? Sunday. Enforcing Sunday observance was the law enacted by who? Constantine in AD 321. Okay. Constantine was the first emperor, ruler, secular power along with the church to create the observance of the enforcement of a day, which is Sunday. Okay. It says this edict required townspeople to rest on the venerable day of the sun. Do we find this in the Bible? Rest on the venerable day of the sun? No. This is what? Notice what it continues to say. But permitted countrymen to continue their agriculture pursuits. Farmers, they can continue to do what they need to do to allow the plants for food, right? Okay. It says, though virtually a heathen statute. Do we know what a heathen statute is? Heathen is the same word. Heathen is pagan. That's what heathen is. Okay. It's pagan. A heathen law. Okay. Pagan law. It was enforced by the emperor after his nominal acceptance of Christianity. Nominal means that his heart wasn't in it, but he thought that it would just be it would be useful for his government. He wanted to bring people in, right? He wanted the more people in his empire, the better, right? Just like any politician would, right? And we're gonna see an example of this here in this next. I'm gonna show you this YouTube video, just so we could see an example. We're gonna see it right here. This, just so that you have a heads up, this is one of the presidential candidates. He was a former president, and he's running again this year. Donald Trump. Notice what he says, okay? And he's speaking to Christians. Okay, he's speaking to Christians. Notice the words that he says to those that are listening. It's Donald Trump rally uniting church and state. Okay.
Hear from the pastors and the ministers and the rabbis. The people in this room are the people we want to hear from. And
who is he talking to? Pastors, ministers, rabbis, right? Religious people, right? Okay, so here we have the state speaking to the church. Okay, so he wants to bring them together. He wants to unite them. He's trying to unite them. Okay, now whether he becomes president or not, I don't know. Whether or not he will cause such laws to come in when he becomes president, I don't know. But we know that it will happen. Okay, whether it's him or not. But what I'm trying to show you is an example of what it looks like, what it sounds like. Notice what he continues to say.
they have to have a political voice. You know, if you think about it, you have men, you have women, and you have religion. If you look at it, you have more than the men, you have more than the women. You have such power, but you weren't allowed to use that power.
You have power. You have power, but you weren't able to use that power. Okay? Notice.
And you're now allowed to use it. I get in there, you're going to be using that power at a level that you've never used it before.
He's going to explain what he means when he says you will be able to use that power in a level that you weren't able to use it before. Okay, he's going to explain what that is. Okay, notice.
It's going to bring back the churchgoer. I mean, you have to see. I don't like the charts. When I see charts where they're going in the wrong direction, we don't like that. We're going to bring it back, and I really believe it's the biggest thing missing from this country. It's the biggest thing missing. We have to bring back our religion. We have to bring back Christianity in this country. Thank you. Thank you very much. I issued guidance making clear that the right of freedom to worship does not end at the door at a public school, and I supported school prayer, very important, school prayer, which we forced.
What do you say?
Practice the
Prayer in school, which we forced.
que no sean forzados.
No,
Hacer la fuerza.
Oh, no ser forzados. Forzados.
forced. That we forced. Okay, so when he says that he's going to give the Christians power, what is he saying? He's going to give them the power to force. Okay, this is the issue that we have with church and state. When you combine those, then you have the same thing that we saw in the history of Rome, the little horn coming up to persecute for 1,260 years. This is the same spirit, the same mentality. Okay, when you force people to go to church, when you force people to worship, this is the spirit of Antichrist. Okay, okay, this is Satan, not God. That is, now we have an example. There are possibilities. We don't say that it can't happen. Okay, that if he becomes president, that he will actually do what he's saying, right? This is a promise that he's making to Christians of the United States of America, right? He wants to combine church and state. That's what he's telling them. Now, we are living in the time of the sealing. God is sealing his people. In order for this, what he's saying is to make enforce religion upon the people. In order for that to start happening, there are other things that also need to happen. Okay, and so our eyes need to be open to the events that are taking place. Among them, this is one, the political world. What are they saying? What are they doing? Are they trying to cause church and state to be bound up together? This is important. We need to be able to see these things coming. Okay, and so this is one, just an example. And by the way, this was just recent. This was recent. Let me see if we have the date here. 2 months ago. 2 months ago. Mhm. 2 months ago. All right. So now we have an idea of what that looks like. These are the things that we need to see happening once he's president, or if it's not him, another president will have to bring it in. And what are we talking about? We're talking about the combination of church and state coming together to force people to use that power, the power of the state, to make people worship. Back to the slides. Humbled in the sight of the nations, those whom heaven had once favored above all other peoples of the earth were to learn in exile the lesson of obedience. And so hopefully we can refresh our minds as to what this is talking about. Okay, so in exile, they were to learn the lesson of obedience. Who was exiled? Do you remember?
Was,
Yes, the Jews. The Jews. And so what is it referring to? Do you remember? The 7 times. Remember, 25, 20 years, they would be scattered. Right? So this is what it's talking about right here. That they would be exiled. They would have to learn the lesson in exile. I will correct you in justice. Okay, the justice is that he would have to punish them, and will not let you go altogether unpunished, he declared. This is Jeremiah 30:11. Yet before all the nations of the earth, he would demonstrate his plan to bring victory out of the apparent defeat, to save rather than to destroy. God gave the prophet the message. This is the message, okay? He who scattered, there's the 7 times, right? This verbiage, when you see it in the Bible, this is what he's talking about. The 7 times. He who scattered Israel will gather. Remember we talked about the gathering time? When did the gathering time take place? No, 44. You're right. Yeah. 1844, October 22nd is when God began to gather. Okay. So this is the prophecy of the gathering, the 7 times, and then at the end of those 7 times, he would gather them and will keep him as a shepherd a flock. They shall come and sing aloud on the height of Zion. Okay, and so this should bring us back to Revelation chapter 14, verse 1, where you see the Lamb standing on Mount Zion with who? With the 144,000 with him. This is the same prophecy. See? Their life shall become like a watered garden. They shall never languish again. And that word languish is to become sick. Okay? There would be no infirmity in heaven. No. In heaven is nothing but life. Life eternal. I will turn their mourning into joy. I will comfort them and give them gladness for sorrow. Jeremiah 31, 10 through 13. Now notice, okay, we're talking about binding up the law among the disciples. We're talking about when God would begin to seal. When does he begin to do it? During the gathering, at the end of the 2,520 years. At that time, he would begin to seal them, right? And so when did, according to what we've studied already, when did the sealing begin? November 18th, 1848. 1848. You can say technically 1844, but it's actually the sealing. They didn't begin to get light on the sealing, or the event of the sealing didn't begin until 1848. Okay. 4 years later. See, because they needed to learn, right? They needed to learn during that time of gathering. They were to learn what? Notice what it says. Behold, the days are coming when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel. And so here we have the new covenant, which Christ established, okay? And so here, where it says the house of Israel is no longer the Jews. By this time, this new covenant must refer to the Christians and the Gentiles that were grafted in. The house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. Okay, so here's the parallel. Here's the parallel. He brought them out of Egypt, right? Okay, now notice my covenant, which they broke, though I was a husband to them, says the Lord. But, okay, so because they broke that covenant, God had to make a new one. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days. Which days? The 2,520 years. 2,520 years when he gathered them. Okay? At the end of that prophecy of the scattering, he would gather, right? That message is on the chart. It's right here. We studied all of this already. And so at the end, he would gather them after those days, says the Lord. This is what he does at that time. I will put my law in there and write it in there, and I will be their God, and they shall be my, okay? And so during that sealing time, he's binding or sealing the law among his disciples. This is what he's doing. He's writing his law. This is the new covenant. He will put his law in their minds and write it on their hearts. And by doing this, they become, or he becomes their God, and they shall be his people. No more shall every man teach his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord. Remember what it means to know the Lord? John 17:3. And this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. This is what it means to know the Lord. If you know the Lord, then you know that there is only one God. See? For they all shall know me. This group of people right here, coming out of the scattering and being gathered again, they know who God is. They know that he's only one God. It says, from the least of them to the greatest of them, says the Lord, for I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more. Okay? Why? Because during this time is the Day of Atonement, when God begins to cleanse the sanctuary. Remember the 2,300 days? He said he would cleanse the sanctuary. That's what Christ is doing right now. That's what he began to do at the end of the 2,300 days, at the end of the 2520 years, the prophetic years. He would begin to cleanse the sanctuary in heaven, the most holy place, of those sins. To this day, that is what Christ is doing for us. Okay? Is it important to know that? Right. These prophecies in the Old Testament are giving us that information. And he would write his law in our hearts and cleanse us from sin. Is that important?
Yes.
Amen. Okay, so let's go. Notice this, Ezekiel 11, verses 16 through 20. Here we have the very same prophecy given in different words. Okay,
The same prophecy.
the same prophecy. So the writing on the heart, all of that, this is the same prophecy, but is a different individual. The prophets are subject to the prophets. They are saying the same message. They're talking the same language. They have the same mind. Notice what it says. Ezekiel 11, 16 and onward. And by the way, this is the same prophet that talks about the sealing. Remember that he says that the angel with the writer's inkhorn, he's the one that goes to write or seal, put a mark upon those that sigh and cry. That is the same angel spoken of in Revelation chapter 7. Okay, but notice what he says here. Therefore say, thus saith the Lord God, although I have cast them far off. What's that, cast afar off? Scattered. That's what that means. I have cast them far off among the heathen, among the pagans, and although I have scattered them, there it is, among the countries, yet I will be to them as a little sanctuary in the countries where they shall come. And so this should remind us of Daniel. Remember? In Babylon, what did God do for him? Blessed him, gave him visions. God was a sanctuary to him. Remember his three friends? They were thrown into the scorching oven. Remember? What did God do for them? He was a sanctuary for them. He took care of them, made sure that they didn't burn, right? That's what he's saying here. Okay. During that scattering time, there would be a remnant there. There would be a little group of faithful that would know and recognize the true God. Okay. Therefore say, thus saith the Lord God, I will even gather you from the people, that is, from the pagan nations where they were scattered, and assemble you out of the countries where ye have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel. And so that the land of Israel here is not talking about the land here on earth. This is talking about, because it's in the future, right? This is talking about heaven, the New Jerusalem. See? These people are those that, again, Revelation 14:1, are seen with the Lamb on Mount Zion. These are they that have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. The 144,000 are being mentioned here. It says, and they shall come thither, and they shall take away all the detestable things, sins, iniquity, okay, lawlessness thereof, and all the abominations thereof from thence. And so they would study their Bibles, they would be led by Christ in the prophecies. We're talking about from William Miller all the way down the first, second angel's message. This is exactly what happened. They found that they were in error. When they found this out, and the churches that didn't agree with them, they ended up having to come out of where? Babylon. So that's the second angel's message. Come out of Babylon, my people. It says, and Charles Fitch was the one to give that message. Now, notice, they shall take away all the detestable things. These are all the false doctrines of Babylon and all the abominations thereof from thence. And then it says, verse 19, and I will give them one heart. Everybody that would be gathered would receive one heart. Not each and every one their own, It says one heart. And I will put a new spirit within you, and I will take the stony heart out of their flesh. And so God is doing what? We have a spiritual operation, a heart transplant, because they had a stony heart while they were in Babylon. God is taking away the stony heart and he's giving them a heart of flesh. And I will give them a heart of flesh. Verse 20, notice. Okay, it says different wording, but it's giving us the same message. It says that they may walk in my statutes and uh, and keep mine ordinances. And so these statutes are speaking of the law. Which law? God's law. Okay, because they had departed from it. Remember, it needed to be restored. And keep mine ordinances and do them, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God. Isn't that the same thing that Jeremiah said? Right? They shall be my people, and I will be their God. Because they are keeping the covenant, they are keeping the law. Okay?
By giving them another opportunity.
Giving them another opportunity. Yes. Yes. A seal is defined to be an instrument of sealing. Okay, so we're talking about the work of sealing. That which is used by individuals, corporate bodies, and states for making impressions on wax upon instruments of writing as an evidence of their authenticity. Okay, so just like a signature, right? When you sign a document, it has to be your signature, right? That signature shows your authenticity, your authenticity. No one else can sign that signature like you do, right? So likewise, in olden days, the kings, councils, all of those important corporate bodies, the states, had to have these seals.
They still do.
They still do, right? And that seal shows the authenticity of that uh, institution, right? Okay. It says the original word in this passage is defined a seal, i.e., a signet, ring, a mark, stamp, badge, a token, a pledge. Among the significations of the verb are the following: to secure, to anyone, to make sure. That's the sealing that I believe that is taking place.
Yeah, there's not gonna be no mark on our fort. We're not gonna get a stamp on.
No, it's not a visible
Not
mark.
that type of a seal.
No, it says to set a seal or mark upon anything in token of its being genuine or approved. Okay, and so God needs to put this seal upon us in order for us to be what? Genuine or approved? Approved for what? For salvation. That you can be part of this number that is being sealed. To attest, to confirm, to establish, to distinguish by a mark. And so to be set aside, to be distinguished, right? So that at the end of time, right before Jesus comes, there'll be two groups. One group will have this mark, this seal, and it will distinguish them. How it will distinguish them, we're going to see, okay? By a comparison of Genesis 17:11 with Romans 4:11 and Revelation 7:3 with Ezekiel 9:4, which are all verses that we looked at except for maybe not Genesis 7:11 and Romans 4:11. Mark them down so you could take a look. But they're all dealing with that seal or mark, okay? In connection with the above definition, the reader will see that the words token, sign, seal, and mark are used in the Bible as synonymous terms. They're all the same. Okay? They mean the same thing. The seal of God, as brought to view in our text, is to be applied to the servants of God. We are not, of course, to suppose that in this case it is some literal, just like Brother Tony said, it is not some literal mark to be made in the flesh. And this is the big issue that in most, I don't want to say all, because I'm not sure, but the majority of Christendom today believes that it's a literal mark.
Oh, yeah.
All right?
Mhm.
They believe that it's a barcode, that it's a number, visual number on your forehead or your hand, okay? Or a microchip or all of those things. That is error. That's not what God is trying to say, okay? Notice it says, but that it is some institution. Okay, what an institution? Do we know what an institution? All right, let's take a look here. Okay, institution is English. It looks like there's only one. A society or organization founded for a religious, educational, social, or similar purpose. Okay. All right. That's what institution means. Now, but that it is some institution or observance having special reference to God, which will serve as a mark. Okay. Between the worshipers of God and those who are not in truth his servants, though they may profess to follow him. And so God in this sealing time that began November 18, 1848, he began to distinguish a people. And these people came out of that scattering time and he began to gather them, right? Okay. Now he begins to teach them something, and we know that we read it already, and we're going to run into it again, but it has to do with keeping the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Isn't that the third angel's message? And so here we have, just like we had mentioned before, that they would uh, proclaim the Sabbath more fully. Remember that quote? That they would proclaim the Sabbath more fully. This is part of what that means. That they would see something more than just keeping a day. That is a seal. That it contains God's name and God's signature. Okay. It would be the mark of distinction between worshipers of God and those who are not in truth his servants, though they may profess to follow him. Okay. This is the distinction that is being made. Number one, the seal of God is found in connection with the law of God, right? We already read that. The seal of God is found in connection with the law of God. We're going to see how. Notice Isaiah 18:16. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. And notice the testimony and the law are always bound together. To the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, there is no light in them. See, so this is why it's important. The testimony and the law always together. Number two, the seal of God is that part of his law which contains his name. Okay. The seal of God is that part of his law which contains his name or descriptive title, showing who he is, the extent of his dominion, and his right to rule. Notice what we read, Revelation 14:1. This is that special group, the 144,000 with the Lamb of God. And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on Mount Zion, with him 144,000, having his father's name, right? The father's name written in their foreheads. We're going to see uh, more closely, or with more detail, what that means. Notice, the law of God is admitted by all the leading evangelical denominations to be summarily contained in the Decalogue, right? Everybody recognizes that the law of God exists. The Ten Commandments exist. Every religious institution, every religious church, whatever group, they all have an understanding that the law, the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, they do exist, right? We have then but to examine these commandments to see which one it is that constitutes the seal of the law. Okay, so we're gonna see, we're gonna get a little explanation, or we're gonna review, better said, the law to see which one contains the seal, or his name. Or in other words, make known the true God, the law-making power. Okay, only one commandment can have this. Notice the first three commandments mention the word God, but we cannot tell from these who is meant. It doesn't give you an explanation, any more detail about who's talking. Who is this God? It doesn't give us that information. Okay. All right. It says, but we cannot tell from these who is meant, for there are multitudes of objects to which this name is applied, right? Many gods, as a matter of fact, it's going to give us here. It's going to give us an example from Paul. It says, there are gods many and lords many, as the apostle says, right? There are many people that claim that there are different gods. Passing over the fourth commandment. Okay, so we're going to skip it just for a moment. We're going to pass over the fourth commandment. It says, for the time being, the fifth contains the words Lord and God, but does not define them. And the remaining 5 verses do not contain the name of God at all, right? Because the last it should be 6, right? Oh, because it went to the fifth one. So the last 5 after the fifth, that makes 10, are commandments in regards to your neighbor, or to our neighbors, right? Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not bear false witness. All of these precepts have nothing to do with God. I mean, technically speaking, they are. God is the one that gives them, but they are in reference to our relationship with our neighbors, right? Okay, so now notice what he continues to say. Now, what shall be done? Question. With the portion of the law which we have examined, it would be impossible to convict the grossest idolater of sin. With those 9 commandments, we don't have an idea of who this God is. And so we can't convict anybody of any type of sin because the God is not known. through these commandments. It says, the worshiper of images could say, this is an example. This idol before me is my God. His name is God, and these are his precepts, right? He can use the same commandments, the 9 commandments, say, this is the God, and apply them to this God. The worshiper of heavenly bodies could also say, the Son is my God, and I worship him according to this law, right? See? And we can see now why it was important for that little horn to change the 4th. This is the one out of all 10 that he actually reworded. He changed what it meant or what God meant to say. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
Oh,
Ya quiero saber.
thus, without the 4th commandment, the Decalogue is null. You know what null means? Nulo. And void. So far as it pertains to enforcing the worship of the true God. Right? But let us now add the 4th commandment. Restore, that's what we're talking about, right? Restoring to the law the true meaning of what God wanted us to know. Restore to the law this precept. Notice he wears the word precept, right? Just like we saw in Ezekiel, that then after God does the operation, he takes out the heart of stone and gives us a heart of flesh. Then we would walk in his precepts, in his law. That's what he's referring to. Which many are ready to contend has been expunged. And see how the case will then stand. As we examine this commandment, I want you to pay close attention, okay? Which contains the declaration, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth. Okay, so let's pause. It tells us who he is,
The Lord.
the Lord, and the Lord is the owner, right? Made, what does that mean? That he created. Okay, so owner, creator of heaven and earth. Okay, it changes everything now, right? Now we know who he is, we know his title, we know his position, and we know his extent of rule, heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. Okay, so now with this, notice what happens, etc. We see at once that we are reading the requirements of him who created all things. The Son then is not the God of the Decalogue, right? If God created the Son, then that means that the Son cannot be God. See how important this law is, this precept? Do you see the importance of it now? It says, the true God is he who made the Son. No object in heaven or in earth is the being who here demands obedience. For the God of this law is the one who made all created things. Now we have a weapon against idolatry. Just with this precept, we have the weapon against idolatry. Now this law can no longer be applied to false gods. Right? Now it can only be referring to one God, the true God, who have not made I'll read it again. Now, this law can no longer be applied to false gods who have not made the heavens and the earth. Jeremiah 10:11. Now, the author of this law has declared who he is, Lord thy God, the extent of his dominion, heaven and earth, and his right to rule. For every created intelligence must at once assent that he who is creator of all has the right to demand obedience from all his creatures. Does that make sense? If he's the creator of all things, then he can demand obedience and worship. Not the creation, the creator. Thus, with the fourth commandment in its place, this wonderful document, the Decalogue, the only, notice the emphasis, the only document among men which God ever wrote with his own finger, has a signature. This is the only document and the only part of the document, the only precept of the document that contains his signature. It has that which renders it intelligible and authentic. It has a seal. Okay, do you see the seal now? Lord God, creator of heaven and earth, right? But without the fourth commandment, it lacks all these things. Lacks. Hace falta. From the foregoing reasoning, it is evident that the fourth commandment constitutes the seal of the law of God, or the seal of God. But the scriptures do not leave us without direct testimony on this point. We have seen above that in scripture usage, sign, seal, token, and mark are synonymous terms. Now, the Lord expressly says that the Sabbath is a sign between him and his people. Notice Exodus 31:13. Verily, my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it is a what? A sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you. Okay. The same fact is again stated by the prophet Ezekiel. Again, Ezekiel 20:12 and 20. Here the Lord told the people that the very object of their keeping the Sabbath, that is, observing the fourth commandment, was that they might know that he was the true God. This is the same as if the Lord had said, the Sabbath is a seal. On my part, it is the seal of my authority, the sign that I have the right to command obedience. On your part, it is a token that you take me to be your God. And so, without the keeping of this day, who are we actually worshiping? Satan, Antichrist, right? Because this is the day that contains the seal, and this distinguishes you between the worshiper of the true God and the worshiper of a false God. Does that make sense? Let's continue. Should it be said that the principle can have no application to Christians at the present time? In other words, it's going to explain. As the Sabbath was a sign between God and the Jews only, it would be sufficient to reply that the terms Jew and Israel, in a true scriptural sense, are not confined to the literal seed of Abraham. In other words, the application that this would refer to the literal Jew or the carnal Jew is not correct. And he's going to give us the reason why. In a true scriptural sense, are not confined to the literal seed of Abraham. Abraham was chosen at first because he was a friend of God, while his fathers were what? Idolaters. Okay. And his seed were chosen to be God's people, the guardians of his law, and the depositaries of his truth, because all others had apostatized. Okay? This is why he chose the seed of Abraham. Okay? From him. And it is true that these words respecting the Sabbath were spoken to them while they enjoyed the honor of being thus set apart from all others. But when the middle wall partition was broken down, and the Gentiles were called in to be partakers of the blessing of Abraham, all God's people, both Jews and Gentiles, were brought into a new and more intimate relation to God through his son. Isn't this what we've been saying? Right? And they are now called Jews inwardly. And this is something that Paul says over and over. And Israelites indeed. And now the declaration applies to all such, for they have as much occasion to know the Lord as had his people of old. We refer again to the fact that the same company who in Revelation 7 have the seal of the living God in their foreheads are brought to view again in Revelation 14:1, having their father's name in their foreheads. And so here he's going to explain what that means. The name in their foreheads, which is synonymous to the seal of the living God, are used synonymously. The chain of evidence on the point is rendered complete when it is ascertained that the fourth commandment, which has been shown to be the seal of the law, is spoken of by the Lord as that which contains his name. The proof of this will be seen by referring to Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 6. Notice what he says. But at the place which the Lord thy God shall choose to place what? His name in, there shalt thou sacrifice the Passover. So God chose the place to put what? His name. How was his name placed in a certain location? Notice what it continues to say. What was there where they sacrificed the Passover? There was the sanctuary, having in its holiest apartment the ark with what? The 10 commandments, the fourth of which declared the true God, right? It's the fourth commandment that declared the true God and contained his name. Wherever the fourth commandment was, there God's name was placed. Okay. And so when God says that he wants to place his name in our foreheads, what is he placing there? The fourth commandment. Wherever God places his fourth commandment, there his name is. According to the verse that we just read, according to the explanation that we have here. And this was the only object to which the language could be applied. Okay? Wherever the sanctuary was, wherever God said, put the sanctuary there, that's where his name was, because that's where the Ark of the Covenant was. That's where the table of stones were. That in the very center of that law was the fourth commandment. That's where his name was placed. Having now ascertained that the seal of God is the holy Sabbath, having his name, we are prepared to proceed with the application by the scenes introduced in the verses before us, namely, the four winds apparently about to blow, bringing war and trouble upon the land. And this work, restrained to the servants of God, should be sealed as though a preparatory work was to be done for them to save them from this trouble. This trouble is the great time of trouble. And this is that work that is being done through this angel to prepare us before that time comes. We are reminded of the house of the Israelites. Notice the parallel, or the comparison. We are reminded of the houses of the Israelites, marked with the blood of the Paschal Lamb, and spared as the destroying angel passed over to slay the firstborn of the Egyptians. Remember that? Okay. They had to put a what? A mark over the border of their doors. It says, also of the mark made by the man with the writer's inkhorn, Ezekiel 9, upon all those who were to be spared by the men with the slaughtering weapons who followed after. And we conclude that the seal of God here placed upon his servants is some distinguishing mark or religious characteristics through which they will be exempted from the judgments of God that will fall on the wicked around them. Are we seeing the parallel, right? There was a mark on the border of the doors that saved them from that destroying angel. Likewise, during that time of trouble, there will be also an angel that will be slaughtering through the seven last plagues. And who will be those that will have be saved from those calamities? Those that have the mark or the seal. As we have found the seal of God in the fourth commandment, the inquiry follows, does the observance of that commandment involve any peculiarity in religious practice? Yes, a very marked and striking one. Okay. What is the distinguishing difference between those that have the seal or that keep the Sabbath and those that do not? It is one of the most singular facts to be met within religious history that in an age of such boasted gospel light as the present, right? There's a church at every corner. Everywhere you go, there's lots of churches, lots of ministers, lots of congregations. When the influence of Christianity is so powerful and widespread, one of the most striking peculiarities in practice which a person can adopt, and one of the greatest crosses. One of the greatest crosses. Do we know what that means? Yeah, when it says a great cross. Okay, so just imagine what Christ had to do, right? He had to bear a cross. He was crucified, right? And he had to carry that cross. Was it hard for him to carry? Yes, as a human, it was hard for him to carry. The Sabbath is one of the hardest things that as humans have to bear. Because the rest of the world is the day that they use the most, right? This is why it's gonna be one of the greatest crosses for us. This is one of the greatest crosses he can take up, even in the most enlightened and Christian lands, is the simple observance of the law of God. The fourth commandment requires the observance of the seventh day of each week as the Sabbath of the Lord. But almost all Christendom, through combined influences of paganism, okay, and the papacy, have been beguiled into keeping the first day. Okay. So why is it that the majority are keeping that day? Because of paganism and the influence of the papacy have beguiled into the keeping of the first day, A person has but to commence the observance of the day and join in the commandment, and a mark of peculiarity is upon him at once. Yeah? Is this clear? Are we able to relate at all? Yeah? This is what makes the distinguished, or the makes the person that keeps the Sabbath will be peculiar. He will stand out among the crowd, because the great amount of Christians will be keeping which day? The day of the sun, Sunday. He is distinct alike from the professedly religious world and the unconverted world. So not only is he distinct from the churches, but he's also distinct from the world, because the world doesn't keep any. We conclude then that the angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, is a divine messenger in charge of the work of reform to be carried on among men in reference to the Sabbath of the fourth commandment. The agents of this work on the earth are, of course, ministers of Christ. For to men is given the commission of instructing their fellow men in Bible truth, but as there is order in the execution of all divine counsels, it seems not improbable that a literal angel may have the charge and oversight of this work. And that makes a lot of sense, because angels do come and go. There are angels here now, even though we can't see them, even though our eyes can't see them. We know they're here. The Bible makes this very clear. In Revelation 14, we find the same work again brought to view under the symbol of an angel flying in the midst of heaven, with the most terrific warning that ever fell upon ears of men. We shall speak of this more fully when we reach that chapter, and we have already reached it. First, second, and third angel's message. This is what we're studying. So it correlates exactly, fits perfectly with what we're studying. We refer to it now as it is the last work to be accomplished for the world before the coming of Christ. And so before Christ comes, this work must be done. The sealing. People must know about what? God's seal, the fourth commandment. 10 commandments, all 10, but we want to let them know that the fourth is that seal. This is what makes us distinct. This is what makes us different from all the rest of Christianity. Okay? It says before the coming of Christ, which is the next event, in order that the prophecy and hints must synchronize with the work here brought to view in Revelation 7:1-3. The angel with the seal of the living God mentioned in chapter 7 is therefore the same as the third angel of Revelation 14. So the angel that we're studying right now, the third angel, the one that says, here is the patience of the saints, here are they that keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. This message is the very same message that we are studying right now, the Revelation chapter 7, the sealing of the 144,000. Is that clear? And this view strengthens the foregoing exposition of that seal. For while the result of the work in chapter 7, a certain company are sealed with the seal of the living God, as the result of the third message of chapter 14, a company are brought out, rendering scriptural obedience to all the commandments of God. Verse 12. But excepting the fourth, there is no commandment of the Decalogue upon the Christian world theoretically needs reforming. and that this is the representative question in this message is evident from the fact that the keeping of the commandments, observing with all other moral precepts the Lord's Sabbath, is what distinguishes the servants of God from those who worship the beast and receive his mark. And so here we've already been able to get a good view. God has a seal and the beast has a mark. And we know that if God has a seal and it's the Sabbath, then the mark of the beast must be what? The enforcement of the day of the sun, the venerable day of the sun, or Sunday. But it needs to be enforced. Once it is enforced, then it becomes the mark of the beast. That just want to make that clear. As of right now, there's no legislative law that is making anyone keep the Sabbath or keep Sunday, right? There's no law, but when it comes, then it becomes the mark of the beast. Does that make sense? Once that law is enacted or enforced, then we have the mark of the beast because it's not enforced yet. And we know it's coming. Which is and will hereafter will be hereafter shown the observance of a counterfeit Sabbath. And so it is the counterfeit Sabbath. That we know for sure. For in order to make it manifest that the winds are being held, there must be disturbance, agitation, anger, and jealousy among the nations, an occasional outburst of strife. Okay, so that's how we know that 1848, right? The outburst of strife, this agitation, disturbance, anger, jealousy among the nations. That's what happened in 1848, November 18. There was that outburst in France, remember? And so, like a fitful gust, breaking away from the imprisoned and struggling tempest, and these outbursts must be suddenly and unexpectedly checked. Okay, so when it comes in unexpectedly, and when it ends unexpectedly as well. These are the things that we are to notice. This is how we know that these winds are being let loose. Okay, this is going to be important, so try to remember that. Outburst of strife suddenly, and then they suddenly and unexpectedly are checked. Then, but not otherwise, would it be evident to him who have at events in the light of prophecy that for some good purpose the restraining hand of omnipotence was laid upon the surging elements of strife and war. And such has been the aspect of our times for nearly half a century. Commencing with the Great Revolution, which we have mentioned quite a bit so far, of 1848, when so many European thrones toppled into the dust, what a state of anger and political unrest has existed among all nations of the earth. Now, and unlooked for complications have suddenly sprung up, throwing matters into apparently inextricable confusion and threatening immediate and direful war. And now and then the conflict has burst forth in fury, and 1,000 voices have been raised to predict the greatest crisis had come. Right? And so when these things happen, the whole world, religious and non-religious, start thinking that the world's coming to an end. Because this is what God uses to let us know, or to wake us up, right? To let us know that his coming is near. These events, we need to be watching out for them, right? The universal war must result. That's a world war, right? We've had World War One, World War Two, um, and other wars, even civil wars. And the termination no man could foretell, when suddenly and unaccountably it has been extinguished. All subsided into quiet again. In our own land, the terrible Civil War of 1861 to 1865 is a notable instance. By the spring of the latter year, so great had become the pressure upon the nation for men and means con- to continue the war that it had seriously to impede the progress of the work symbolized by the ascending angel, even threatening to arrest it entirely. And so during that time, the church, even the church, had to kind of slow down, had to be careful during that civil war, right? They couldn't move as much. They weren't able. They were riding horses, and there could have been some crossfire, and so that in a way got in the way of the work being done during those years. Okay. Notice what it continues to say. Those interested in these truths, believing that the time had come for the application of the prophecy and that the words of the angel hurt not. Okay, so we're going to find out what that means. It says, indicated a movement on the part of the church, accordingly raised their petitions to the ruler of the nations to restrain the cruel work of tumult and war. Days of fasting and prayer were set apart for this purpose. Okay, so those that recognized what was taking place had to come together and what? For prayer. Is it important for us to meet in prayer? Yeah, it's very clear. If it weren't for that, that war could have continued and killed more people. Okay, and so when we see these things, we know what we are to do, right? There's a quote by James White. It says, present truth uh gives present duty. Okay, it gives us present duty. So this is present truth. These things are happening today, right? It lets us know what we ought to be doing, right? The seal of God is present truth. It lets us know what we ought to be doing. We ought to refine the keeping of the Sabbath. If there's more that we need to study about it, then we need to go through it, because this is God's requirement. God wants us to do it. The time at which this occurred was a dark and gloomy period of war, and not a few high in political life predicted its indefinite continuance, and applying or and an appalling intensity of all its evils. But suddenly a change came, and not 3 months had elapsed from the time of which we speak, ere the last army of the Southern Confederacy had surrendered and all its soldiers had laid down their arms. So sudden and entire was the collapse. So sudden and entire was the collapse, and so grateful were all hearts for the relief from pressure of the terrible strife, that the nation broke forth into a song of jubilee, and these words were conspicuously displayed at the national capital. This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in your eyes. That is a Bible verse. This was displayed where? In the capital after the Civil War. There are those who believe there was a definite cause for the sudden cessation of the strife, of which, of course, the world is but little aware. The sudden conclusion of the Franco-German War of 1870 and the recent war between who? Turkey and Russia. All right. So even the wars that take place amongst the Muslims, right, are also, as we will see later on, have to deal with the winds, okay, and the ceiling. That we need to remember. May be cited as still later examples. Perhaps further events of this kind, he says perhaps because he's not sure, right? He doesn't know what's going to happen, but he knows that it has to do with this, the sealing of the 144,000. Perhaps further events of this kind are yet to be witnessed to fulfill more completely this feature of the prophecy. Okay, and we shall investigate those events and how it applies to us and how it applies to the prophecies of Revelation chapter 7 and Revelation 14. Okay. Okay, and that is the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you will be able to join us for our next presentation. We'll keep you posted uh, as we continue to look at these things and the importance that it entails for our time. May God bless you, and may you receive a great blessing upon the Sabbath day.